This is an amazing experience getting to this point, I have to say that. And it's not without a lot of encouragement and a lot of support and a lot of pushing and a lot of heel digging in. But I'm here. And I just thank everybody for being here. And as nervous as I am, I think the important thing to acknowledge is I really respect the people who are the forerunners who sat in this seat before me. Now I have a whole different view of the entire situation. I can acknowledge quite a few people for helping me, but I think everybody who is here is going to be added on to that too. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Enid, for the opportunity. And Daryl, am I speaking loud enough?
Wonderful.
Oh, good. But it's not without a lot of anxiety. And I looked at the face in the mirror and I said, you can do this. And I look out here and there's a whole bunch of more eyes looking back. And just let me know I can do it. I can. So I've entitled it, Bringing the Past to the Present for the Future. The passion and investment that propels these meetings, the team's commitment with Enid's leadership, helps us all to share the vision. So after saying no a lot of times to our resourceful organizer, the white flag finally went up. Here I am, hoping to do justice. In honor of my late husband, George, with the help of Dick Varley, his wife, Muriel, and my longtime friend. Dick should be here. I respect why he's not now. And the Varley pioneering history is taking shape. Dick's and George's sister, Clara Clouston, their Aunt Noreen Cuthbert obliged with research, and it was unanimous as to how quickly the present becomes the past. Memory is a ruthless competitor. The opponent is at large. Never mind. We gave it our best. I'm on my way. In 1957, the Varley name entered my world. First with Dick's stock car racing, and then at the wedding of Muriel and Dick. I met his brother George. So begins my journey with the John Leonard Varley family. In 1954, Victoria became my home. Born in Flin Flon, Manitoba at the age of 7, with my parents and sister, we made the big move to British Columbia. A tiny fishing village and last settlement on the northwest tip of Vancouver Island was our destination. Winter Harbor became our home from 1944 to 1954. Near a mile-long, 3-plank raised board walk followed the contour of the beach and connected each home along the way. It was a keyhole harbor, safe in any weather. Our fresh water was gravity-fed. There was no electricity. Everyone grew their own garden, did their own baking and preserving, had chickens, and put in orders for the weekly freighter to deliver. A co-op store stocked staples and most things that commercial fishermen might need. Every resident owned a trawler that was tied up to floats in front of their houses. Water was the only way in and out of the village in those years. And being tidal, the high water would often flood the boardwalk and gardens. That's when the men would pick us up with hip waders and bring us to school and retrieve us again after school was over. Guessing it was the 1980s, Moore's Logging Company pushed a road through and then things changed. But the harbor was almost a ghost town by then. The population, most being young families, was close to 80 people, 26 being children. One teacher taught all 8 grades in the one-room school. After the 8th grade, we were sent off to the cities to continue our education, and soon life was transformed. Families were scattered in Victoria, Port Alberni, Vancouver. Values that were formed with community living in that little remote fishing village became the solid foundation as we shifted into city living. Victoria became home for our family in 1954. We loved everything about it, my sister and I. The bright lights, the boys, the music, the dances, bowling alleys, and real streets with real traffic lights and real cars. No more boats and paddles. It was just the best. After my Sprotcha education, where I first met Enid, I started office work for the Greater Victoria School Board in the Craigdarroch Castle. That's where my friendship with Muriel Varley, then McLean, began. The history and beginnings of the extended Varley family is now in Canada, and quite easy to sort out. John Leonard, known as Len, born to Herbert and Emma Varley in Yorkshire, England in 1904 was one of 9 children. In 1922, at the age of 18, he arrived in Timmins, Ontario, where he joined his brother, who owned a clothing store. Len found work in the Porcupine Gold Mine and made Timmins his home until 7 years later, when in 1929 he decided to make a trip to British Columbia. He connected with relatives, the Jackson family, who were living in Sydney. It was time for a change, and so began his life in Victoria. Dick recalls some of his dad's stories about various jobs, paying 75 cents a day. It wasn't easy, but he was a good, hard worker, and that gave Len a foothold to prepare for the type of work for the rest of his life's journey in Saanich. Until he married, his whereabouts present curious questions like, where did he reside? What did he do? How did he spend his time? What were his activities? Questions that are lost, not the questions, but the answers forever. In November 1929, he married and met his wife of 48 years. Gertrude Maud Cuthbert was born in 1912 in Sydney, Australia. She was one of 4 children. Her older brother died from prickly heat, and that prompted the family to move to Victoria in 1914, when she was just a year old. Maud's grandfather, George Percival Cuthbert, was living in Victoria at that time, which is likely why they chose to come to Canada. The old family home is still on Oldfield and Bear Hill Roads, where she grew up with her 2 younger brothers, who were born in Victoria, Roy Cuthbert, 1918, and Norman Cuthbert, 1921. The boys went to England when they were young men and served in the British Army. Maud would take the train to Vic High for school. She had a job at Cunningham's log house, likely until she was married. The Cunningham family might be willing to add more information for us, because this is as far as we could get. Not too much is known about Roy after he left home. He did a lot of traveling and moving around. He did marry and made his final home in Australia. He was a lobster fisherman and was lost at sea. Maud's youngest brother, Norman Cuthbert, stayed on the Saanich Peninsula, married Noreen Simonson. They had 4 sons, lived in Saanich, and were farming entrepreneurs. A hard-working family making their home on Culture Avenue in central Saanich for many years. Then the family moved to Duncan, where they operated their large dairy farm on the Cocosila River, again for many years. A devastating fire totally burned the family home and all its contents. Many of Maud's and Len's life history and pictures, coins, and souvenirs held in trust were lost too. Norman is no longer with us, and Noreen is living in Duncan. One of the sons continues to operate a dairy farm. Len met Maud Cuthbert, and they were married November the 12th, 1929. So begins the John Leonard Varley lineage on Vancouver Island. Maud's grandfather, George Percival Cuthbert, born in England in the 1800s, father of George Charles Cuthbert, everybody was George, went to make his life in Australia. At a young age, he headed off to work in Valparaiso, Chile, in the lumber field. We conclude that his son George Charles, that's Maud's father, was schooled in Valparaiso and likely was born in Australia. An uprising of sorts in Chile or the lumber field forced the family to leave the country. Dates have eluded us. So to which continent did the family go this time? Back to Australia or to England? We do know for certain that Maud was born in Sydney, Australia on the 8th of December, 1912. With her parents, George Charles Cuthbert and Hetty, his wife, they immigrated to Saanich a year later, and the Cuthbert family became 3 generations on the peninsula in 1914. We do know that Maud's grandfather, George Percival, was the first to come to Victoria and began variety gardening, where the Gaunt Vet Hospital on the highway is located. Dick suggests 1904 could be a consideration because of some old coins his great-grandfather gave him. As far as our information, the previous owners were the Campbells. He continued farming in this location, and before he died in 1942, his son George Charles and young family of 3 were already established. Maud's early years are likely an echo of all the young families during those days and years of the First World War. We have very few family details on those early years. Her brothers aren't with us either, so we'll now fast forward to November 12, 1929, when George Leonard, Len, and Gertrude Maud were married, and the Varley name started making more Canadian history. After a short time, After they were married a short time, they bought and moved into a small hunter's cabin on Santa Clara Avenue with approximately 1/2 acre of land. Like all young families, hard work, long hours, raising children was a generalized lifestyle in those years. They learned and utilized their skills. Neighbors became friends, communities were established, and fences were only used to keep horses and cows and chickens and goats contained. Families shared life, living with other families, and children knew freedom. It was a good life, not always easy, but it was good. Additions, repairs, upkeep to the little cabin soon evolved into the home that the 3 children grew up in. Clara, born in 1930, Dick in 1932, and George in 1934. Some old newspaper that seems to have been used for insulation in the walls was uncovered recently, and the date of that was 1927. Maud grew a large garden with the help of her grandfather still farming near the highway, managed the home part of her family using well water and preserving what she couldn't store. She and her longtime neighbor, Olive Reed, became lifetime friends. To assist with family income, I recall Maud talking about picking loganberries further along Santa Clara. I think it was the Tucky farm. Eventually, when the children were school age, she began candling eggs at the Armstrong chicken farm. An amazing lady, beautiful qualities, gentle and loving, a friend for all. I did it. Len became a truck driver and in his mid-1930s worked into a job with the government, BC Highways. His responsible workmanship, his dependable willingness, and he was a hard worker, eventually awarded him the position of highway maintenance foreman. This he continued until he retired. I recall Lynn telling me this little story. He was needing some help with roadside maintenance and hired John Chu. The job being finished, John said to Len, "One day I will repay this favor." And that day came when George returned to Victoria in 1957, George Varley that is, and was looking for work. Len remembered, John remembered, and George began his 37 years with Chu Excavating. Oh, those were the years where a gentleman's handshake was all it took. The Varleys had a nice group of close-knit friends who got together playing cards, having parties, dancing and visiting, along with the hard work, a comfortable, appreciative, well-lived lifestyle. In 1965, they ventured on a 9-month world trip, beginning with the passenger freighter, visited many continents, and managed to reconnect with family in Australia. The family home on Santa Clara was sold, and in 1969, Len and Maud relocated to a cozy little place on Amherst in Sydney. There they continued to live together for another 8 years, growing a wonderful garden, having their family close by, and watching their grandchildren move into adulthood. In 1977, at the age of 64, Maud left us. Life changed a lot for all of us, excuse me, understandably for Len, and he wasn't well himself. He had his family, was thankful for that, but life for 2.5 years without his wife of 48 years was empty. In February 1980, at the age of 76, Len, known as Pop or Grandpa to his family, departed. Clara and Don Clouston were married in Winnipeg, returned to Victoria, and built on Del Monte Avenue. Then a few years later, in 1966, built again and moved into Souk with their 3 children. Don's career with the Navy ended, and he and Clara farmed their land with cattle and a myriad of various resources, maintaining an active life with their growing family. The children have left the nest, but the busy keeps hanging around. The time and help of their active grandchildren is especially appreciated during the haying season. Valerie, their daughter, started her office career in Vancouver, then moved to Trail, where she continues her career at the Tech Smelter, formerly Caminco. Home will always be Souk. Her interests are many, and topping the list is travel. It's safe to say she's been everywhere. Donnie worked in a mill, loved the outdoors, hunting, fishing, stock car racing, skidoo riding, just name it. Eventually, he and Rachel settled in Prince George. A health condition is limiting his activities. Clara and Don make the long drive and visiting a priority. Tim stayed close to home, added 3 wonderful grandchildren to the Clouston family, is now a grandfather to a little girl himself, and Clara and Don are enjoying the bonus of being great-grandparents. Tim is a mechanic and lives with his wife Barb in Victoria. Dick and Muriel McLean Varley-McLean, living in Sydney, have a home on the lake in Newbo. Dick's journey is etched with significant milestones. Stock car racing, old-timers hockey, his career as a mechanic, first with Bleethman Service and then Chew Excavating. Dick's signature might be, "I'll help wherever I can." His friends are many. Muriel graduated from Vic High, was a payroll clerk for the Greater Victoria School Board, and added varied artistic skills to her rapport. Painting and sewing and helping with theatre costumes, to mention a few. They are an inspiration for all who know them. When the two children, Karen and Rick, were young, the family went to England and traveled for 2 years. There they met the rest of the Varley families. They both enjoyed some interesting world travels many times since then. Karen married Bill Levis, and they have 2 sons, Robert and Ryan. Robert and his wife Cara, both lawyers in Calgary, are living and raising their children there, 3 little girls. That makes Dick and Muriel great-grandparents. Ryan, still living in Victoria, is an aspiring author holding his vision. Rick married Sandra Griffiths. They have 2 sons, Morgan and Michael, and home, the original family home on Elkwood. Rick has been working at Island Farms Dairy for years, upgrading and advancing to his position now as plant maintenance supervisor. The first meeting of George Varley and Dorothy Oakes, November 16, 1957. The wedding reception of his brother Dick and new bride Muriel at the Strawberryville Community Hall. My sister and I were helping with the refreshments. Everything was lovely. People were quietly chatting, observing the bride and groom, politely making conversation, doing all those things that get handled at wedding receptions, wishing the fun would begin. Well, it did, without warning, and the outside door crashed open, revealing 2 young men, obviously under the influence, arms over shoulders, holding each other up, singing the Frozen Lager at the top of their lungs. Mouths wide open, revealing a missing tooth in one mouth and a dark tooth in the other mouth. Needless to say, they had a captivated audience, and when I looked at Muriel, I knew that this was not part of the program. Soon the wedding formalities faded, the party got underway, and George Varley and his best friend Don Gibson were sort of swallowed up in the crowd and activities. That was it. I met the groom's brother. 2 years later, November 28, 1959, we were married. George's youth was full of what boys and guys like to do most. School did not fit into this category. Fishing and duck hunting on Elk Lake, deer hunting in the forest, that was his style. Girls and parties came in second place and sometimes didn't even qualify because his car needed more TLC. When they were young and early teens, George and Dick spent summers at Oyster River with the Macaulays, who were neighbors in Saanich. Buying land, clearing, building, farming, logging, horses, fishing, a perfect summer in George's world. It was no surprise when George graduated, and with Don Fish on board, they headed north for Smithers to invent their future. George stayed, Don didn't. In the fall of 1953, he was hospitalized, critically ill with spinal meningitis. His mother really wanted him to come back home. She sold Clara's piano and bought a TV. George didn't come home. His recovery was with the Swift family and quick. Clara's piano did get back to her again and is happy with her and Sook. He loved his northern interior friends, the unspoiled nature, the hunting and fishing. He always managed to find work, used his UI coupons when he had to, and then moved on. His face would light up when he recalled the adventures in logging with horses. The job on the Queen Charlotte Islands was short-lived when he was seriously burned and had to be airlifted to the Prince Rupert Hospital, again for a spell for recovery. George kept a diary, a one-liner he called it. In July 1950 it was started, and he kept it up until April 2010, when he couldn't hold his pen any longer, 3 weeks before he left. It saved many arguments and solved a lot of questions, and one time even kept John Chew out of the courthouse. We married November 28, 1959, and George and I bought land from his parents and built our home next door to their family home on Santa Clara. We moved in on December the 3rd, 1961, with 1 baby, and by 1966 our nest was in full motion of 4. We managed to live our lifestyle on 1 income, raising our 4 children and my baby sister. Debbie came to live with us when she was 7 years old. Our other sister and myself were already married, and when our parents died, Varleyville became home for Debbie and her doggie. Debbie became the big sister aunt in 1963 to the children. She graduated Claremont, pursued an office career, and now lives in Colwood with her husband Tim Howard and the little doggie Tasha. All of our children graduated from Claremont High School. Danny chose a career like his dad, became an entrepreneur, and with his wife Karen raised his 3 daughters in Coquitlam. Matthew, living in Langford with his wife Joan, is a welder and owns his own business, Coastline Metal Works Limited. Matthew and Joan have a blended family and are very happy and active grandparents too. Mackenzie, Matthew's son, lives in Victoria. Joan's daughter Faye and her husband Curtis with 2 young girls live in Duncan, and so does her son Ben. Mindy and Bruce divorced, live in Saanich, and continue together raising their 4 children, Graham, Heidi, Taya, and Jean. Mindy, another Varley entrepreneur, owns Buddy's Raw Pet Food. Bradley and Tammy divorced, living in Victoria, added Alexis and Ben to the Varley family. Bradley and his life companion Kathy own and operate Adept Installations. He has a broad field of interests and skills, especially with wood. George's interest in living life fully took his family on a journey that's hard to put into words. He built our first camper on the 64 Chev. He built a dinghy. Then the fishing in lakes and rivers started. Eventually, with the Beaverages, our first skiing experience evolved into years of families and friends on the mountains in the winters, with summers on the ocean in our boats exploring and fishing the Vancouver Island coast. George and I did a bed and breakfast for 4 years, then in the early 1990s volunteered at a guest riding ranch deep in the Chilcotin for 5 months. Between 1981 and 2002, travels found us in Europe several times. Our little RV became a traveling B&B with many thrilled out-of-country visitors. George was passionate with living family life and living life fully. Time was the essence of this drive. His life's journey indicates that becoming more of who he wanted to be depended on the challenges he was willing to face. So he spent his life setting up challenges. Before we met, he was enrolled at the Arthur Murray School of Dancing, and soon, together, we were stepping our way through life as man and wife, and family and expenses, sometimes doing the rumba, maybe the cha-cha or the polka, or maybe the waltz. But whatever it was, we were always on the go, doing our best to keep our feet under us. He was happy with his work at Chew Excavating. Even with the illnesses he had throughout his life, his feisty determination gave him the strength he needed and the courage to achieve. He was a great teacher. After a 7-year challenge with cancer, we said goodbye, May the 20th, 2010. It's a huge loss, a big void, and he is deeply missed. I knew this would happen. His gift is the life we shared, the forever memories that inspire us to continue doing the best we can, remembering George, who unselfishly provided and led his family on an amazing 50-year journey. Now, 5 years later, the Varley homestead is still the only family home our children and grandchildren know. I'll stay as long as I can, keeping the door open and family tradition, and maintain the family tradition that has made 5035 Santa Clara a home for so many. We have been and are abundantly blessed.
I had something to that.
Please.
George, he asked me to do something. I was running the machine at the time. I told him I can't do that. He came over and he said, Doug, this is in my vocabulary, there's no such word. He said, think about it. If you can't do it one way, try again.
Doug, that's really valuable. That's your little legacy that he left you with then. Did you do it? He for his size and stature, he was a giant in every other way. He was a small man in stature, but his principles and his standards, he just held strong to them. He'd get pushed, the carpet would get pulled out, but he really presented, he presented a way. We were welcome to join him, but he didn't like to be led. He had a very strong aversion to just being pushed or pulled. It was good. Thank you, Doug. That means a lot. It's nice to hear stories. It would be nice if he could have known a lot of the things. Well, he did. The thing is, admitted or heard from other people the things that that we're saying and remembering now. Our friends are longtime friends. Evie and I were raised in Winter Harbor as neighbors, side by side. We knew each other way before we knew our guys. And our guys, there we were at the north end of the island, and Evie and George and Denny at the south end of the island, and the twain met. And here we are, generations later. Yeah.
Dorothy, I asked how many years you and George were married?
Just 50. I prayed that we could make 50 years, and that was when we were married 47 years. And then 50 came along, and I wasn't satisfied. I prayed for more, but I didn't get my wish. So we were married in November, and he left in April. So it was just a little better than 50 years. And the lovely part about it was, it may be a milestone, maybe not, but when he was 75, he was 75 on the 5th of January, and he left after that. So he got to be 75 too. It was kind of nice to hit those milestones together. Well, there were a couple of times in life. I mean, it wasn't all hunky-dory and waltzing. Sometimes it was a march going in the opposite direction. And we had to really sit and decipher why we got married in the first place. Was it worth it? And there were 2 times we really hit that boundary and had to really reevaluate and made a good decision. Thank you so much, everybody. I absolutely, totally appreciate the value of George's friends and embracing me and keeping me on board with you all. It is a privilege and a gift, and I treasure it.
Thank you.
Thanks.